Good evening, Endo Summit Live, and welcome to this essential webinar on where to begin with endometriosis. We are talking about endometriosis education and advocacy with two of the greats this evening. Please welcome Rosemary Phillips. Rosemary, can you introduce yourself?
Yes, I am Rosemary, and I have been in the endometriosis space for quite a long time. It took me 4 surgeries to get my diagnosis, and 13 surgeries total to get to the spot where I am today. But I'm just so grateful to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me. And my background's mostly in health and well-being when it comes to organizational health and leadership coaching and things like that. So I've brought it into this space quite a bit in most recent years, but really glad to be here with you and Kate.
It is wonderful to have you. Joining you this evening is Kate Boyce from Endo Girls Blog, but you are so much more than that. Kate, can you introduce yourself to everybody?
Yes, hello. Thank you for having me. Appreciate it. Rosemary definitely underplayed herself a little bit there.
All right, we're going to go back to that.
Yeah, I think we'll see that. So I am a board certified patient advocate, endometriosis patient, of course. I always say my story is much like many of those in this community. My background is in biochemistry. That's what I went to school for. I still get to be a consulting chemist, which I love doing. That's where I get my scientific background that I integrate into the patient advocacy realm today.
Excellent, excellent. So, you guys have a presentation. Now, you guys did something very special. Can you hit the high? We're going to share it later, but can you hit the highlights on what you did? And then you can share your slides also.
All right, Rosemary, you start with that one.
All right. Well, a few years back, I had created a very, very basic course on endometriosis, and it was on a platform that was not easy to use or anything like that. But I was just getting frustrated with access to information and good information. And so then I reached out to Kate because another one of my businesses is a platform around creating courses around well-being, and all of the instructors are actually disabled. Um, and so I thought it would be an awesome platform to be able to host information around endometriosis as well. And so I asked Kate if she'd be willing to dive in and create some information. And I did not expect us to create 120 lessons around endometriosis. It was a lot of blood, sweat, and tears on both our ends, and really just a landing spot essentially to get some of that basic information and how endometriosis affects us emotionally, physically, and where to get good information. So we'll share a lot more about the course specifically and where to find, some of the key topics that we're going to walk through today, as well as a QR code at the end. So
Excellent. Do you want to share your presentation?
Yes, thank you. Oh, I don't have the share my screen.
Oh, maybe the button I hit went wrong.
Rosemary, do you have a share screen available?
Wait,
I'm
I'm changing
looking.
the button now.
Oh, okay.
Remember, I changed it to see if you could both share. Maybe I should just change it back. All right, try again. It's at the bottom.
Yeah.
I'm not
Hmm.
seeing it on my end.
Yep. Let me see. I think we got it.
Yeah. Oh, yay.
You see?
I see.
Okay. Oh, there we go. Okay. So we just wanted to put this together. Sometimes I know when I'm hanging out watching, my eyes can go back and forth doing a couple things. So I wanted to make things maybe a little bit easier for anybody who is watching this to kind of glance over at the screen. So as Sally had titled this, Endo, Where to Begin? Rosemary and I, this is very near and dear to our heart, this subject. So um, essentially, if you've been in the endo space for a while, if you haven't been, if you're new to it, I feel like one of the first things that we really come across is information seems to be all over the place. Different definitions, so many different routes of, ways people talk about treating the disease. It's just there's so much out there. And so, really I feel like because the disease is misunderstood even in the medical and research communities, we've got so many outdated myths that continue to cycle about endometriosis. A lot of the information that we see repeated is from, they're inaccurate sources just because, but they're shared widely because the source is maybe a big name, right? We see that a lot with news in general. And then again, many organizations frame endometriosis simply as a uterine disease, which is going to influence how it's studied and treated. So I feel like we could take a step back from the very beginning and do the whole like defining endometriosis. But I feel like with the people, everyone watching this, I feel like almost everyone probably has a really good grasp, already that, endometriosis is a whole body disease. We have to look at it beyond, just being a reproductive disease in order to make progress in this field. However, it's important that we recognize that, especially the newbies coming in, they're still going to get inundated with that, right? This is a reproductive disease only. So that's why, the definition debate still exists, right? I feel like I like to say it's just one driver behind inaccurate information, but it's a really big driver of the inaccurate information. It just kind of feels like it's something that's just always kind of there. So in the top right corner here, I do have the most recent consensus kind of working group. Everyone, I know a large group of individuals and some organizations got together and said, okay, we can at least come to the, maybe the conclusion that we can say this definition, right? So systemic inflammatory disease characterized at surgery by the presence of endometrium-like tissue found outside the uterus, usually with an associated inflammatory process. So with that being said, Sally, do you have anything you would like to comment on that?
Do I have anything I'd like to comment on? I think that one thing that in the position that I'm in, I'm getting a little more work internationally. And I think something people don't realize is that here we're working so hard in the US to stop having the uterus represent endometriosis. And what I'm seeing is the international sites still really have that. Still really like even when I've gone abroad at one point, like I cannot stand to define success as the person had a baby because that's so not even the definition of success of disease. But I think this notion of framing endometriosis as a reproductive disorder is rampant. And
Mhm.
we think we make a difference here, but I would
Mhm.
like to see the whole world taking your course, including the marketers, the researchers, and the graphic designers, because I can't stand seeing that uterus one more time as a representation of the disease that is not even a uterine disease.
Right.
All right, it's been a bad day, so maybe you should
That's
ask.
okay. No, but
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
important, right? And I
Okay.
feel like it's good for the passion that is there.
And
Rosemary.
yeah, I feel like they're catching on as well because it's getting trickier and trickier as you go to different websites and we'll look for the correct definition. And it used to be where we're like, ah, yes, we found the correct definition. And then you think that then the rest of the site might be okay. But I think that, a lot of folks have been catching on to because we've been driving that home, for so long that it doesn't necessarily mean just because the definition is correct on a site doesn't mean that then the rest of the site is correct, which is why I think this presentation and some of the information Kate's going to be sharing in a bit is going to be so important to
Well,
be
I
aware
think
because it's just one piece.
that's an excellent point, Rosemary, because I see I've sat in meetings with some of people who are very well accepted by big organizations for whatever that's worth. And they'll even sit there and have a concern. We've now gotten people to recognize excision or to recognize that endometriosis is not a reproductive disorder, but it's still a marketing arm it's saying the right words on sites who maybe aren't going to do the right thing. And I
Mhm.
see that every day.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep. It's rampant also with the theories as well. So, which I'll get into, they're finding ways to see what the community is asking for, what the community wants, and finding ways to kind of twist words a little bit. I call them half truths to make their point. So that's another reason why it's really difficult in getting, solid, accurate information, or at least somewhat trustworthy information about endometriosis. So, um, I kind of go into this. Why does this even happen still? Why is there even a push for one way over another, even if maybe science is saying, no, we know that endometriosis is not a uterine disease. We see it under a microscope. We see all of these different presentations of it, and it's so much more. It's just not that anymore. Even, we could go back all the way back, even Samson saying, if anyone, this is not the same as uterine tissue. But I think it's important. One of the things I explain to patients, as an advocate, and people are talking with me, how do I find information? And then we start to get into the nuances of it and the political side of it, and it's confusing. And it's almost like, why would I believe what you're saying? Because this sounds so this is so bizarre. And it comes down to this. So you get funding as often tied to outdated theories. Many grants and research initiatives are built on, originally on the idea that endometriosis originates from uterine tissue. And so you've got research that started in the 90s on that, and it's the same researchers over and over again that have, really made it in that world of academia, and they're going to continue to get their grants as long as they continue on that premise. So in academia, it's called grants get grants, and they're not going to, magically switch all of their life's work because there's some new information out there that may or may not, work in their favor. So that's also tying in with that academic careers, depending on existing work. And I explain to people, I've got lots of friends in academia. It can be cutthroat. It's not, it's an unfortunate way that it works. So it's really important for the patient, as the patient, we keep this in mind. It's just a really big picture, unfortunately, for a disease that just still has so many unknowns. So I say, this paves the way for misinformation or information based on those half truths. Rosemary, what are your thoughts on that? Like, I feel like sometimes it's hard as a patient to find out, I'm just trying to get information. Why do I have to know all of this nuance? Why do I have to know the politics behind this? I feel like it's
I
discouraging.
know. And it's so hard because it can be, you're already in a state of overwhelm just trying to find good information. And so then to be in that state of overwhelm, to then have to understand all of those different nuances, it just, it's almost information overload, right? And so oftentimes when sitting down with patients and kind of talking them through the process is also giving little bits at a time about the politics, the nuances, behind it, because it is too much information all at once to be able to take in. But I think that's also, uh, you really spent so much time making sure everything in the course is cited, thoroughly cited, and you know, so that it and calling out like where there might be, some differences and things like that, because it's a lot to navigate, a lot to navigate. And
It
especially if you're not thinking from like a science mindset too.
Yeah, and it's a lot to put on a patient, I understand that, to expect a patient to only be utilizing, the best information and sharing it. I look back. So occasionally, I'll get like a memory on Facebook, like 8, 9, 10 years ago, and I'm sharing some information about endometriosis that is so cringy. And I'm just like, I can't believe that I was doing that, but I didn't know. I was
Yeah.
new, newly diagnosed at some point, and just excited to share my disease. Like I finally know what I have. And so I think a lot of the time, information that we see isn't necessarily because of some political underlying thing. It's just, unfortunately, those are the big names that are sharing a lot of the information. And so it's easy for us to just reshare, especially as like a newbie. You would expect, such and such to maybe be reliable, but it may not be.
Right.
So, fortunately, I think that has somewhat improved. But also another thing about with endometriosis, with there being so many unknowns, and that paves the way as well for a lot of this, like what you see is like medical grifting. So the uncertainty of it creates opportunity. With so much still unknown, you've got patients seeking anything and everything for relief. I feel like all of us at some point have done every which way thing to try to get relief from our endometriosis. So we come across information that says that it could, this is going to help you do this. Okay, I'm going to do it. If something, I've spent money on things I shouldn't have spent money on, inevitably. So because there's no cure, right? There's an easy exploitation. I think the most relatable thing is like you see with cancer, people, there's all sorts of wackadoo things, for cancer. And that's where you can sometimes get into like the pseudoscience over the evidence. So you get a lot of products and programs. Everyone's familiar with a lot of programs out there. You can heal endometriosis without, the scientific backing or clinical trials. And then, of course, the expense part. Endometriosis patients spend so much money on everything, just from maybe missing work to trying to pay for any kind of medical treatment, then we spend extra money that we don't have on something just kind of on that Hail Mary. And then of course, I think it's important to look at sensation, the impact of sensational articles. You get a lot of, as companies are in a race to be the first to come up with a new drug or test, you're getting a lot of this like sensational push that inevitably is a way of just getting funding for things that aren't new. So oftentimes it'll say it's the first of something and it's not. So it's something, these are all things that I think are really important when, looking at information about endometriosis. If you're reading something, these are all things I think, this is just setting the groundwork, the foundation. Um, planting the seed to have in the back of the mind, kind of saying, hey, remember this? Is this kind of piquing this feeling here that this might not be good information, that maybe I should dig into this a little bit more? And Rosemary, I know that you have experience with, getting almost taken advantage of in a lot of these ways. And Sally, I'm sure you have your own experiences as well.
Yeah, just being wary of the absolutes, right? Because there is no cure. There are no absolutes. There is no 100%. And it is so hard. When I just reading through this slide, like, yeah, I can check the box on a lot of these things, and I had good information. I actually knew the truth, but I was still so desperate for relief in any way, shape, or form, um, that I still was willing to try anything, you know, despite knowing some of the facts. So, uh, and this, if you were to just look on social media and just put in endometriosis, you're going to see a lot of these things,
Right.
a lot more so than the correct information.
Right. That's one of the reasons, I always bring this up, because inevitably that's how we get a lot of information. So we just want to, type in endometriosis into a search bar, and, inevitably something like this is going to come across it. And so I think, when I'm discussing ways to, just how to approach getting information about endometriosis, I feel like this is really almost just foundational to have, in the back of your mind. So,
And that can be for diagnostic tests and
yeah, we see that a
everything.
lot. Yep. Um, and so with all of this in mind, starting your own research, I think that it's important to, number one, be cautious. You have the major nonprofits with financial or ideological ties to outdated theories, meaning are these nonprofits associated with researchers or giving grants to researchers, tied with researchers that are focused on research that is outdated, focused on endometriosis being a reproductive disease. Are they just studying uterine tissue and saying that's endometriosis research? So, and then looking into patient advocacy groups or just patient advocates, or that prioritize science over special interests, sensationalism, and financial gain. So, like, I've never seen, endometriosis summit, go after some sort of like sensational headline just to get followers. You know what I mean? So it's like you can look through post and you can look through the history of what a group or an individual has been doing and see, okay, they're not selling a program. I don't see that they're getting grants from this group. That could be a conflict of interest, and I don't see them sharing sensational headlines, things that should just kind of be like the green lights or the red lights. And so that's something I wanted to touch on, how to spot that unreliable information, just a couple tips. So I've got two different columns here because we've got online social media information, and that's going to be a lot different than if you're looking through information that's, scientific research. So say somebody who's like looking through like the PubMed, if anyone's out there as a patient doing that. So I think for social media, and online, coming across blogs or whatnot, I think sweeping generalizations, that's a huge red flag. People with endometriosis have higher rates of anxiety. And then typically after that, there's, either there's like a program that's going to be trying to be sold or a supplement or something
Will
along
heal
those lines.
you.
Want to be an influencer, I don't know. Just something to get likes. It's like, okay, but it's this, and then even if they give a citation, we can get into that, like how to even know if that citation is reliable or not. But it's that overall sweeping generalization with no nuance. Scary sounding facts is a big one. Endometriosis patients have more toxins in their blood than people without. I've seen that one repeatedly. Again, that goes into selling a product. And the reason that is problematic, again, is patients end up potentially spending thousands of dollars on programs based on something that is being misrepresented and presented to them. And then also claiming to know some unspoken truth, unknown until now, the real driving force behind endometriosis is bacteria. It's another.
Kate, Kate, I just want to add something. So in the beginning of January, I was in a social media incubator, and the incubator people pick through your profile, and this is the exact thing that they're teaching people to teaching people to do to grow profiles. Now, the Endo Summit doesn't really do that we don't, all our growth is really organic. I can't really care if one person is watching or if 10,000 people are watching. But what was interesting to me is in this incubator you had to be selected for that was wellness related. They're stressing all of these things, especially the scary sounding facts, to try to grow profiles. So I'm very happy to see that you've flat out like put this as a red flag. I'll also say the algorithm itself picks up on these probably more positively than other things. So anything you start with, what sucks, or something very shocking, the algorithm picks up on more keenly than somebody who is being like heartfelt and speaking from the heart, which is why I think our community needs to stand by the people who are not searching only for the algorithm.
Absolutely. Yep. There are some newsletters I get. That's interesting. You said that. I follow, I forget I've signed up for, but I log into another email and I get all these updates and it's like how to grow your following. And some of them are specific to endometriosis. And I'm just sitting there thinking to myself, how, it's just to grow a following. And so I think that's one of the reasons, I always put this out there. These are red flags.
Yeah,
Rosemary,
and I think another is you'll also see them linked to like specific marketing coaches as
yeah,
well. Um, and a lot of the content will look exactly the same,
yes,
the
yep,
templates and
you're
all of
right.
that.
They are their templates. I've come across that a lot.
Because it's a
And
sales technique, right? And
yeah,
yeah.
I've come across some that didn't even have endometriosis, but said they did for the sales. And then later comes out, when you're in a forum with them.
I used to work with a specialist who used to talk about their endometriosis, and that's why they need to work in endometriosis. Never had endometriosis and was almost diagnosed with it and almost lost an ovary. And you can't see my middle finger up right now, but that's not what our community needs, is people manipulating them even in their most vulnerable moments.
Right. And ultimately that's what this is about, right? It's not like a bash fest on someone trying to, make a following on social media. It's simply the fact that it's taking advantage of a vulnerable population. And that's why I get passionate about it. If it was just someone out there who has excess amount of money and no big deal, they want to try some thing they find on social media to cure random back pain, whatever, that's their prerogative. It's just when it starts to take advantage of a vulnerable population where it's already so difficult to get right information and then trying to combat that as well. It's like that's where that passion comes from. Um, and so I try my best, on social media in any way I can to um, mitigate that. But again, you can't just like follow everybody's social media all the time and try to be the negative Nancy that's always debunking everything. No one likes that either. So when it comes to the scientific research part, this is definitely a lot of where my passion lies is the research part. So just so sometimes I think it's a question. It's like, well, what qualifies you to even know like how to like decipher scientific research? So when I was in school, I didn't get to go pursue my PhD because of endometriosis, but I was already, had already done back then you still had to take a GRE to go to grad school. I had already done the GRE, was getting picked out my lab at the university I was going to attend, and but it was for astronomy and astrophysics. That was my research, and I had spent 3 years working on, my research. I traveled sharing it, presenting it, and I spent 3 years of my life. That's nothing compared to many, of course, who are current researchers and have done their PhDs, but I still spent 3 years of my life just constantly in research, with my advisor teaching me how to dig through academic research, scientific research, how to put together my paper. And really, he drilled it into me. He was incredibly ethical. And thing is that he always taught me was that don't ever try to fake any information, especially, during a Q&A after a talk, because he said inevitably somebody in that room is going to be smarter than you and know more than you, even if you do think that you are the expert on the topic. So really kept me humble in that. But in so many other ways too, digging through data, really looking at statistical analysis and really looking at methodology of research. So that is how I really get into it over here with looking through endometriosis research is I'm really big on looking at the methodology and the statistical analysis because that's where in the research we can really determine if it's trustworthy or not. So here are my big things when it comes to red flags to look for in scientific research. Really, really easy. You don't even have to be a scientist. You can just look at the authors and you can see they should have a list of disclosures at the bottom of that paper or somewhere there might be like a supplemental information where they have to list out their conflicts of interest or disclosures depending on the country. Um, and so a lot of the times you can see if they're a consultant for maybe a specific pharmaceutical company. Sometimes they can get around it on certain journals, but you can spend a little bit of time looking into the authors, saying what do they do, what are their other interests, and see if there's a conflict of interest. Like, they happen to do a study on a hormone suppression medication for endometriosis, and the results looked really, really good. And they're always kind of promoting endometriosis maybe as more of a reproductive disease. Oh, well, you see that they're being funded by a company that comes up, develops medications that are hormone suppression drugs. So looking even just at the funding of the study itself, um, you know, conflicts of interest there. It doesn't have to be pharma. We're at a point now, it could be biotech. Um, you know, Other red flags, in vitro, which means literally basically just think of it as that petri dish research, right? So it's not being done in a human. We can manipulate so many things in the lab to make it work the way we want it to work. And that it doesn't mean it's going to be the same in the human body. So animal-based research is very, very important. But unfortunately, with endometriosis, we're studying unless it's occasionally in baboons, we're going to be mostly seeing it with mice. And in those cases, again, they're either using uterine tissue or maybe they are taking endometriosis tissue from a patient and they're sewing it inside of a mouse. And so in order to do those things, we're manipulating the environment to such an extreme that it's not giving us a real indication of how endometriosis is actually behaving like in its natural state. So those, anytime you see a paper based on that, you can look at the results and be like, okay, with a grain of salt. And then of course, sample size is a big one. Anybody can just look at a paper and say, okay, well, the sample size is small. That's just very, very basic. There's so many other details that go into, the sample, the population into it. But you can, think about it. If we've got an estimate of 1 in 10, which is probably low of individuals, um, thinking, of the female sex with that population of the female sex having endometriosis, if a study has only 100 people in it, that's really how can we make that generalization onto the general public after that? Sorry, I know that I got in my head a little bit there, so I got a little bit wonky.
We see
Um,
this
No,
all the
that's
time.
right.
right.
All the time. We see, for example, like how many people, I don't, you might remember the study where like people with endometriosis are supposedly more attractive than others, right? That was a low sample size. But I also see, say something that works in bariatrics, they want to say that worked in 100 clinics with bariatrics or something like that. They want to generalize to endometriosis. So like we see that all the time too. And we're seeing, listen, I don't want to knock on AI. I think there's a lot that AI has a future for us. But oftentimes I just need the algorithms that those programs are based on to be based within endometriosis. And so like, especially with the summit, we're very selective about what companies we'll work with because you have to look at those things too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
It's like that's exactly why I'm starting to bring up biotech into it. It's not, it used to just be pharma, right? It's not that simple now. It's so much more
Well,
complex.
and it'll be interesting politically to see what happens because we may not have any more neutral funding. We may only have privatized funding to go into women's health. We don't know what the future brings. So it'll be interesting to see how biotech and also pharma, um, they're probably not going to evolve, but how the endometriosis research evolves in our current political climate.
It will be interesting. Endometriosis is interesting in the fact though that so many of the researchers, like I was saying earlier, they're the same people who've been around for so many decades, right? And so it's really fascinating to look at it from that perspective as well and think, is that going to change? Will it switch that up? Will those people, if they don't receive their funding anymore, go elsewhere?
Mm, it's a
Well,
really good
that's
point.
the beauty of biotech in some ways. I think I've seen in the last 6 months people starting to go elsewhere, but when you go elsewhere, you can't shovel the same shit just in a different barn. I don't know what else to say.
No,
Rosemary, go ahead.
that's it.
Literally.
I've experienced that as well, where it was an individual I expected to be a certain way, but they're in this new environment and all of a sudden they're not anymore. And I'm just, here is that exact thing where they're regurgitating or saying what they've got to say because that's the environment they're in. Um, but yeah, you're right. That is the beauty. And this is brought up a lot in research, are you going to be in academia, AKA mostly, funded by the federal government in some way, or are you going to go to the private sector? And there's pros and cons to both. Um, okay. Rosemary, yes. Sorry.
Actually, I'm just looking at the slide as a whole too. I think this is a really great lens to look at even your own doctor, right? Because when I think of different surgeons that I had that weren't especially fantastic, there were a lot of sweeping generalizations, some of
Yeah.
those scary sounding facts. I was required to go on a very specific diet and go through certain tests in order to even be considered for surgery. Things like that this was a long time ago, but I think, and even looking at, you can go to open payments, right? .gov to look at where your doctor's getting, funding and things like that too. And so I think it also, a lot of these can apply to when you're prepping for talking with your doctor. as well.
I was handed a pamphlet in the office when I was diagnosed, but AbbVie was the author of that pamphlet, just to let you know. It was a lot of years ago.
Yeah.
But I think and I also, when you talk about gross generalizations, they don't always have to be like things you don't want to hear, because I remember the doctor going, "Don't worry, we'll get you pregnant, no problem." And that's a
Yep.
gross generalization too, because I really don't think no matter what we did, I was ever going to get pregnant. But they use, the gross generalizations can cause a lot of healing crises. Crisis.
Crises.
Yeah.
Crises.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it might be comforting to hear in the moment, but then it's just making sure you're taking a step back after those appointments, to really evaluate what is the information that I received, where did it come from,
Hmm.
and all of that, because sometimes you have to kind of separate the head and heart there. And I wish I had done that more often when I was
Well,
going through my journey.
I think we all, we can all take a step. That's what I think. I mean, that's why we're here, right?
Yeah,
We went through this.
exactly.
We look back on how we did it and all of the different ways that it could have been done, the ways it could have been better, and how I don't want others, or we don't want others to have to go down this exact same path. And I mean, that's why we're here, ultimately. And as my, like, I know I can speak for myself as my advocacy changes over time and I learn and I grow as an advocate, in this space. I learn more nuances and I become maybe a little bit more flexible in some ways. And I think that's also just kind of part of, being in the space and learning how everybody's journey is so unique with endometriosis. I know even just like culturally, I've
Mhm.
I've just been exposed to so much more, and I've met so many patients from parts of the world that I would have never even been familiar with before, and realized that, oh, I'm saying these things. Like when I first had my excision surgery, and sure, I had a hysterectomy and I had 2 surgeries in 6 months, but for me, it was still, if I wanted everyone to be able to do what I did because it worked so well. But then I'm meeting people who live in parts of the world where that's just not a possibility, right? So it's learning, okay, um, how can I still help advocate for these individuals who may never be able to access the same thing, but help, still help try to prevent some of those horrible experiences, in some capacity. All right. So like we were just saying, this is a lot of work for the average patient. It's so easy for me to be like, make sure you're doing this XYZ when you're looking at the data. Okay, is it this, is it that? Or, make sure you're looking at these red flags. And it's got to take that step back and say, okay, when I was there, I look back at my own social media, what I was sharing a decade ago, and I cringe and I'm like, okay, I was there too. And Rosemary and I spent a lot of time talking about this. And so, when Rosemary presented the project with me to make this course that we ended up doing, we talked about all of this over and over and over again. Most patients can't do all of this work on their own. So we made this free course. And I was hesitant even in the beginning because when I heard course, it sounded like a sales thing, right? Like, oh, here's another program, here's another thing. And the one thing we decided to do was like, this was 100% going to be as transparent as possible. We're going to make it very clear that it's ever changing because new information is ever changing, right? And because we are patients, no, it's not going to be 100% perfect, but I can promise you, because of just my inability to even share information without knowing it is 100%, I can back it up. That's just my own thing. Like I made sure, I was like, I'm going to go through this and make sure that patients are empowered with at least the current best information available, which of course is always changing. New information is coming out, but we wanted a space also where a lot of the times, it was going to be information presented in only one way. And then you'd have to go through a lot of information that was overwhelming. And I know that was big for Rosemary with some of the more
Yeah,
challenging parts.
especially, at different parts of my journey. So, you know, earlier, I was going through infertility and it was really hard to find good information, that I wasn't also in the throes of infertility information. And that's just not what I mentally needed at that time. I just needed the facts that were completely separate from that. And so I wanted to make sure that, you know, there was a space where you could completely ignore that section if that's nothing to do with you, or just something that, might be hurtful for you at that time, and that you could just jump to the information that you need at that moment, and kind of really cut through that information overwhelm.
Yeah, I
That,
think that's really important, Rosemary. We get that feedback also, that like we get the feedback for the summit. I don't offer enough infertility, but we don't offer a lot of infertility stuff because we don't want to torture the people that are sitting in the audience. So we do it now in separate rooms. So in your course, do you have it like set up in different chapters?
Yep. So each section, you know, you can jump to it, and there's a fertility section, and so you can go to it. You can ignore it. You don't have to click next page to then peruse through all that information, right?
yeah,
You can just skip right over it.
yeah,
And it has resources there as well, from all different aspects around infertility. And so that was real. That was a big piece that was important to me, just because of what I had experienced, but then also meeting others later on. I didn't have a whole support system earlier on. It really wasn't until probably the past 6, 7 years that I've built a much stronger community with other people like Kate. And so uh, so just being mindful of that information. So we wanted to make sure that none of the course is you're required to read one page before reading the next, because not all patients need to know the basics about the definition. They already know it and are looking for something else and need to be able to jump to that, or download questions to ask their surgeon, or need a packing checklist because they are getting surgery, that they don't have to peruse through all that other information. They can just go directly to what they need.
yeah. And I know that, so we were trying to figure out, a lot of this also came down to where can we even help send patients that have, need information. And we realized that it was really hard to find a place that was just everything in one spot, that wasn't requiring them to go on Instagram, requiring them to go on Facebook, requiring to go to a website and then have to sift through the website itself. So the thing with Rosemary, that she's really big on accessibility, and so many things that I had never even considered when sharing information that's really, really valuable. And so the way that this course was put together from her angle is making it so that it is accessible to so many different learning styles, different types of attention spans, different types of, understanding and skipping through. Because I know, like, I'm someone that has to skip around. I don't want to have to go through something in succession. And so I just it's something I would have not been able to do on my own without her input on that. And it really just opens the door for so many different types of individuals with different learning styles and different, just, I guess, access to, certain websites maybe, or social medias might not be easy for them. So that was one thing that I really valued when Rosemary was going through this. Sometimes I got really irritated because I'd be like, my science brain is saying, no, this is how the information needs to be presented. And then it needs to be shown this way. And she would correct me and say, yeah, but you realize other people don't learn this way. And so it was it was good because, sure, you can go to my Instagram, but it's going to be the way that I do it, not with the perspective of somebody who in a professional capacity helps teach people, and designs courses. So that was one of the biggest parts of this, in addition to it just being something free, like not even inundating you with annoying you about things. So, this is what it boiled down to. It's called Endo Will Not Win. And then the financial barriers alone, with Endo. So that was really big. So we didn't want to make it a source. So we're like, anyone ever has to pay for anything. So Again, really big on the education empowers patients for advocating for themselves. And so, and we wanted it to be flexible and no pressure whatsoever. So last time I checked it, we had almost 800 people enrolled.
We have 802. I just checked it right
802.
before logging on.
Yeah. And of course, we're going to have to get together and do some updates because it took, I know for the information myself, digging through it and citing sources and whatever else, it took about a year of putting that together. So it's probably time it's time for us to go through it again, but it's something I do want to share. So here's the QR code for that if anybody wants to do it. It sounds like a sales pitch for something that's free. If anybody wants to even check it out, or a lot of people have sent it to like somebody that they wanted, a friend or a family member, a loved one that they want to have learn about endo. But it really made it easy for us too. When someone asks for help, now it's like, oh, we can just say, okay, here, we compiled it all here. Here you go. So I think that's what I got to say about that. It's really difficult for patients to find information, so we did our best to put it as much as we could here.
We got to get you guys a PCORI grant, if PCORI still exists. We have to get you a PCORI grant to put this in multiple languages.
Yes. So, and that is definitely, we've had wonderful, generous individuals offer for Spanish. So that's something that we're working on. We've got the videos, because you can do the translate. Fortunately, I do know AI is helpful, so if anyone needs to. But yeah, ideally in multiple languages. I get nervous a little bit though, because there's that part of me that's like, but what if then something groundbreaking changes and then
We got to change it all throughout. But already, like we do have all of the videos. There's an option to translate to Spanish for everything in the course right now that's in video format. And there's subtitles, for everything as well. And actually, the platform that I chose to host this on, it allows us to do, I think, 60 different languages. So, not promising that right now, but it does give us a lot more ways to be inclusive as possible. And works well with Google Translator and other things like that too. From like a screen reader standpoint, we looked at all of that as well, just to make sure that it's as accessible as
that's why it's
possible.
that's why I wanted to rip my hair out sometimes with the graphics. Because Rosemary would be like,
Yeah.
screen reader doesn't work with this, Kate. And I'm like, oh,
Like
Well,
we can explain it with text. That's totally okay, but they won't be able to see. That'll confuse it.
I come from a special ed background, and so which we work on that at the Endo Summit, that not everybody learns the same way, but the difference that you make by making it understandable to everybody is amazing. Like, the auditory learner, the visual learner, it makes a big, big, big difference.
it does.
It's
It
a
does.
pain. I know it's tough. It's pain, but
I really, honestly, it was so eye-opening for me. It's really great. I appreciate that. That's why I was saying Rosemary was definitely like under presenting herself because the science is the one thing and easy to present the information, but to be able to take the step back and say, hey, we need to present it maybe this way, this way, this way, so that everyone has the opportunity to learn. It's not just financially accessible, right? It's meant to be accessible in so many other ways. And I really value that.
Yeah. We have this all conference art project we're doing, and I had to order the art supplies. And you can tell, like, I learn one way. Like, why am I ordering only stickers that spell things? Like you have to order, like there was also this whole push that I didn't want scissors and glue, but not everybody is gonna express themselves in words, like it's a
Yeah.
very important thing what how you guys approach that. It's very important.
So,
Well, and
yeah,
I
thank
think
you.
that's part of what I think, now my words. I think that's the part that I love so much about this opportunity is the collaborative aspect because, there's no way I could have done any of this without Kate's science mind and attention to detail and like really being able to take information and really break it down into manageable, easily understood ways, right? And then like my learning design background and all of that, and helping making sure we have the inclusion aspect, but then also we have tried to incorporate like a lot of other advocates and professionals, in the field as well. And we hope to add, even more as we progress. And so it really truly is a collaborative effort and a true act of love within the endometriosis community. It's not just, us. There's so many other people even before us that we wouldn't have had this information without them too. So
Absolutely.
Yeah, one of the things that I think is very important about this particular course is, and we touched on this in the beginning, but you can trust the source of the information. And I think in our community, there'll be people they want to do, they offer you a 3-month coaching program for a certain amount of fee. They don't like, and then you're an endometriosis coach. Like, no, that's not really how it works, because Rosemary's probably got more than 10 years of experience below, under her belt, and she's worked hard to be able to present this. Kate has a whole degree and background in science, and it's the way that they've collaborated on this. It's really a trusted resource. It's not a fly by night. Obviously, it can't be a fly by night money grab because there's no money involved. But the other piece of it is also, I think a lot of people are like, yeah, I want to go out and advocate. And it's interesting. I was talking to Wendy Bingham about this the other week, and they want to go out and advocate, but they don't realize like the background that all of us have. And this is one tool that people can use to bring themselves into the fold that is, or the vortex that is endometriosis, the correct way, rather than doing cutesy things only on Instagram. And I like dance on Instagram for a living, but I try to do it educationally. Right.
Oh my God. Yes. And I see that we see that all the time with the individuals who they just, like I was saying, like how I was just excited at the beginning, sharing cringy things or doing things, I was like, oh, I didn't know what I was doing. But and I was saying earlier, it's like, some ways it's almost a little selfish for me now too, because I can just be like, okay, good. I don't have to take all the time to try to like get the background on everything. I can say, okay, we put this together, check this out, try to make it as easy as possible. So like kind of like get caught up, like just get to speed. Because there's no way you can do that really in a conversation with somebody. Try to catch them up on everything that's being done, has been done, and the challenges that we still face.
Yes. So, all right. So, we are rounding out the hour together. I was very excited. This is the first year I managed to make Endo Summit slide templates, and I put yours on the template, but you shared on your own. But so I'm
Oh.
curious. The Endometriosis Summit is approaching. We end each Monday night with what everybody's looking forward to the most. We'll start with you, Kate. What are you looking forward to the most about the Endometriosis Summit?
Well, I feel a little guilty saying it, but getting to see some of my favorite people. It's not it's not common that, especially, in the endo realm, everybody can make plans to be at the same place at the same time. And I'm really, really honored this year for my panel moderator host to be there in person. But I'm very, yes, of
Fingers
course.
crossed that everybody
Fingers
ends up
crossed, but
healthy, that we're all
yes, I
able
shouldn't
to,
jinx it. I'm not gonna
right.
jinx anything, but yeah, I really am excited for that.
And Rosemary, what makes you excited about the Endometriosis Summit?
connection,
Yeah, we work
absolutely
hard on
connection.
that. Yeah. What do you guys think about? I have to get it made. Sometimes we have you made it yourself last time, but I can get them professionally made. What do we think about the postcards again with the course on it? Was that helpful last time? Did because I think if you put all this time, effort, and energy into it, we should get it out there.
Well, actually, we can order it through Canva and it print out
I
on
was
cards
just
and
gonna, I was gonna do
send
the
it to
same
you.
thing.
Yeah,
Uh, yeah. So we'll chat. Let's chat by email about that. But I'll ship it direct there so that it's there on the desk when people walk in. We have one other QR code that'll be there too, but you know, there's room. It's a lot of lectures. They could use their phones a lot.
Yeah, that's good.
All right. I'm actually going on vacation for 2 full days. I didn't get a Christmas vacation. I didn't get a Thanksgiving vacation. I'm going tomorrow. So I don't know. I think next week is adenomyosis, but I have not looked at the
Oh,
schedule.
ugh.
Yes, but that'll
that
be,
wasn't fun either.
I actually think it's teen adenomyosis.
Oh,
Um,
Okay.
I'm sorry.
I know, but if you look back, now everybody in this Zoom room has adenomyosis. I think you can see signs of that when you were
Oh,
in your teens. And so
yep.
I
Absolutely.
think that's what next week's is
Good.
on
Good.
Rachel Haverland.
Yeah, it's perfect because, the whole, oh, that's something you only get later or after you've had kids. And
No,
yeah.
not at all.
No.
Or
Yep.
shove an IUD in and it goes away. And I don't always think that's everybody's experience. Might be
Mm-mm.
somebody's experience, but it's not everybody's
Mm-mm.
experience.
Right.
Yeah. Anyway,
Thank
thank
you.
you for joining
Thank
us.
you.
If you'd
Thank
like to
you.
Thank
register,
you.
I will let people know that the Endometriosis Summit, the middle day, is almost sold out. We have less than 10 tickets available for that. So if you have not purchased your ticket, please go to www.theendometriosissummit.com. Good night,
All right. Good
everybody.
night. Thank
Good
you.
night.
Thanks for joining us.